What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto son of Susanoo? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. The fates were intrigued yet disturbed at the same time. There was an anomaly, a rather big one at that. They slowly pulled out the string that held the soul of the newborn baby, Perseus Jackson. His soul was a different shade altogether, and they felt it. A deep displacement of the space and time of their world. Perseus Jackson was not supposed to exist in their realm, and they couldn't let him just exist in their realm. Anomalies were rare, but they exist, that caused a great pain for the fates to fix. Especially an anomaly this big. A birth of a human that was not supposed to exist on this earth, was quite frankly a problem. No, they had to do something about this anomaly. They used their divine sight to see the event of which the birth of Perseus Jackson and Persephone Jackson. The twins themselves were incredibly small. Persephone's power was still budding as expected of the daughter of the sea god, but it was Perseus Jackson's power that frightened them. His power was incredibly volatile, even more than the primordial themselves. Yes, they had to remove him from this realm. As they raised their scissors to cut the lifestring of Perseus Jackson, a single hand stopped them. They looked up. The hand that had stopped them from ending the life of the anomaly was connected to a tall man. The man was dressed in a blue kimono. In his kimono, he had patterns of dark storm clouds rippling across, almost as if it were real storm clouds. He had a long blade that hung freely from his side. His hair flowed freely behind and a long braid fell down his face. His eyes held a glimmer of mischievousness and a light smirk danced on his mouth. This was the Shinto god of sea and storms. The warrior god who defeated the Yamata no Orochi. The brother to Amaterasu and Tsukuyomi. The fates glared at him with a scalding look. Susanoo grinned at them. Last time the fates and Susanoo encountered, it had caused the Ice Age. Clotho spoke first to Susanoo. What do you want? We can't deal with your problems right now. We have a serious problem to take care of. An even bigger grin threatened to split Susanoo's face. That's the reason why I'm here, he said with a tone that greatly annoyed the fates. I am here to talk about the recent anomaly. Lachesis snarled back at Susanoo. What would you want with the boy? Susanoo's face suddenly turned grim. Father saw something coming up in his favorite realm. A great battle, but an opponent trying to revive her. The fates shuddered. They had remembered her, her cold calculating stare and the massive amount of power she held. Atropos frowned. Fine. But what does the anomaly have to do with this? She asked. Susanoo looked at her. Do you have any use for the boy in this realm? They shook their heads no. Then father proposes a compromise. We take the boy from your world, to ours, where he won't mess up your little world you got here. The fates were confused. Then the anomaly still exists. We cannot let him live. His very existence defies all of fate. Susanoo chuckled. Anomalies in our world are not that damaging to our world, I'm afraid. The fates looked skeptically at him. Here they were trying to get rid of the anomaly, which was going to cause a great headache to them later on, when another pantheon decides to take up the anomaly. Opportunities did not happen like this every day. So you promise that the anomaly will not cross into our world? They asked. Susanoo shook his head no. Father also wanted that if needed, your world would have a backup plan to go with it, so he decided to let the kid live in his realm, while sometimes, where you need help with your whole fate's design, we can send him over. The fates took a glance at the string they held and back at Susanoo. That's it? No more? They asked. That's it. Atropos slowly put down her scissors and looked begrudgingly at Susanoo. Clotho took the string and uncupped her hands together. A bright light illuminated from her hand as she relinquished the Greek pantheon's law over Perseus Jackson's life strain. Clotho then held a glowing orb. Susanoo put his hand out and Clotho placed the orb in his hand. Susanoo grinned. Pleasure doing business with you. The fates grumbled and muttered some unflattering things about Susanoo. Susanoo cheekily smiled before grabbing an apple, taking a huge bite out of it and disappeared to who knows where. Bellevue Hospital Center. After 12 hours of labor, Sally Jackson could finally claim her two beautiful children. She had spent some time with Poseidon, but they were thrilled to have learned that she was pregnant. What was more thrilling was that she learned that she was going to have fraternal twins. She was told that they had to do some regular checkups on the babies though. Susanoo appeared at the hospital the anomaly was being kept. His form shimmered until he posed as a male nurse. He sneaked past the wards housing the babies. In his hand a needle shimmered into existence as he poked the young child in the neck. He silently slipped out. After a few minutes Sally had gotten her second-born daughter. Persephone? She sighed weakly. She stroked her little tuft as she began to feed the newborn. Tap tap tap. Sally looked up. Bunch of nurses were running in the direction of the newborn wards. Sally frowned. Was there something wrong? Fear gripped her heart. Something bad couldn't have happened, right? Nothing bad has happened? Sally was praying to Poseidon when a doctor slowly walked into her room. He was staring uncomfortably at her. Sally looked at the doctor expectantly. Ma'am? Doctor played with his pen. I'm incredibly sorry. Sally's eyes widened. Perseus? She gasped. The doctor just handed her a file. Sally with her hands shaking opened the file. Her tears threatened to spill even before she opened the file. Deceased. Big fat letters glared at her mockingly as she let tears fall from her face. HOWW? She stuttered with giant tears rolling down her face. Persephone, seeming to sense her mother's discomfort, stating wailing. The doctor winced. Well, he stammered. Newborn babies can have many complications during childbirth, and your son, well, seemed to have heart failure. He explained. As the doctor kept on explaining how the child had died, Susanoo began to start his plans with taking the baby with him. He looked in the newborn room where the deceased were held. He smiled as he spotted the one having a sign saying Perseus Jackson. He opened the door and pulled out a body wrapped in a white blanket. Susanoo took out a needle and poked the newborn's finger. Blood welled out of the finger as Susanoo took it and made a blood clone. A Kai Bunshin. He then performed a seal which would cut off all memory ties with the clone and the original, then wrapped the clone around with the cloth Perseus was wrapped around with. Then Susanoo disappeared again just as the door opened to reveal a nurse rolling in Sally Jackson on a wheelchair. They opened the locker in which they had placed the newborn's body and unwrapped it for the mother to see. Sally started sobbing uncontrollably. Tokyo. Susanoo appeared again as he landed on top of a commercial building. He looked down at the child who was unmoving. Susanoo grinned. The poison did its trick, paralyzing the body until it was close to death. He summoned another needle to administer the antidote into the newborn. Soon enough, the child had his regular vitality back and started crying. Susanoo grimaced. He wasn't used to caring for children. His wife did that. Susanoo then took out the orb which held the lifeline of the boy crying in front of him. He slowly placed the boy down and proceeded to shove the orb into the newborn's chest. The body absorbed the orb and the baby started to quiet down. Susanoo concentrated. Now for the hard part. He poured his power into the baby as he started creating chakra coils for the baby. Organs and flesh broke apart before reassembling itself into their respective places. Chakra coils now encircled the child. Susanoo wiped his forehead as he finished up the chakra coils. Finally, Susanoo looked at the child before pressing a seal upon his forehead. It glowed brightly before showing Arashi kanji for storm and faded into his skin. The child yawned before opening his eyes, showing a glowing brilliant blue eyes, which later faded into sea green eyes. Susanoo smiled. He was ready. Amanamanaka Susanoo shouts before a black tear in space. Susanoo steps in with the child. Konoha. Minato was happy. He was happy that he would be a dad. He reflected on what he had done that day. He saw memories of him in his office taking down paperwork, until retiring to let his shadow clones to do the rest of the work for him. He remembered seeing Kushina, hugging her, before crouching down to pat her enlarged stomach. It was then when Kushina's water broke. They had rushed to the safe house where they already planned to have the baby. 4 hours later, Kushina was screaming that it had hurt really badly, and was cursing at him. He tried to keep her calm, but she just glared at him in response. Just as their daughter, Naruto, was born, he felt something wet on his cheeks. Kushina looked up at him asking why he was crying. Minato smiled at her, telling her that he was really happy. Then he came. A man with an orange mask appeared in the room taking out Bawako, who was holding Naruto. Yondaime Hokage Minato Namikaze. Step away from the Jinchuriki, or your child will die a ripe old age of 1 minute. His voice, distorted by the mask, reverberated through the chamber. Minato looked at the man with wide eyes before looking back at his wife. Kushina was groaning in pain. Shit. The seal isn't finished. The masked man spoke again. Step away from the Jinchuriki, or do you want to see your child die? Minato's eyes widened even further. Hold it, just calm down. You should take your own advice, Yondaime. I'm perfectly calm. Now step away from the Jinchuriki. Minato was torn between his two choices. Then the man with the mask threw up Naruto, ready to kill the child with a kunai, but Minato sped towards the baby. The masked man stared balefully at Minato with his one eye. You really lived to your moniker Yellow Flash. But let's see how you dodge this. Minato heard a hiss before he looked down. Explosive seals. Minato quickly used Hiraishin throw the blanket outside before setting down Naruto with Hiruzen. Minato quickly used Hiraishin, and appeared where Kushina was. The masked man already had pulled out the Kyuubi and was staring into the eyes of the Biju. The Kyuubi's eyes started shifting into the Sharingan before disappearing before his eyes. Minato picked up Kushina and used Hiraishin again to Naruto's location. He set Kushina down right next to Naruto, who was crying her eyes out. Kushina, exhausted from the sudden drop of chakra, stroked Naruto's little face and started to trace the faint whisker marks on her face. Kushina brought the small child closer to her chest and just lay there. Minato clenched his fist before opening his closet. Minato, putting on his Hokage robes, got ready for a battle. I'll be back before you realize it. Minato used Hiraishin out of the room to face the Kyuubi. Minato was breathing hard. He had beaten the man with the orange mask, wrestling his control over the Kyuubi from him, and leading up to the point where he had his daughter and Kushina with him. Minato had summoned the sealing bed, for which they were going to use Naruto as the human sacrifice to seal the Kyuubi. Kushina was doing her best to hold down the Kyuubi with her Kongo Fusa. But first he had to split the chakra of the Kyuubi to best seal the Kyuubi into his daughter. There was only one way Minato could think of pulling off. His eyes met Kushina's. He smiled weakly before telling her his plan. Kushina's eyes grew in horror as she listened to Minato's plan. No, Minato. That jutsu will kill you. Kushina cried out while trying to hold down the Kyuubi. She was crying. Minato found himself crying too. I have to. For the sake of Konoha, and for the sake of Naruto. He made the hand sign snake, right pointing arrow boar, right pointing arrow ram, right pointing arrow rabbit, right pointing arrow dog, right pointing arrow rat, right pointing arrow bird, right pointing arrow horse, right pointing arrow snake before clapping his hands together and summoning the great Shinigami. Shiki Fujin Death Reaper Seal. The silhouette of a demon appeared behind Minato. He started chanting incoherent things before a curse seal wrapped around his hand, plunging into Minato's body. The hand erupted from Minato's chest and began to grab onto the Kyuubi. The hand dragged out Kyuubi's yin chakra and sealed it into Minato. The Kyuubi became significantly smaller as its counterpart was sealed away into a new jailer. Minato stumbled, as his body slowly began to feel numb, his soul being ripped out by the Shinigami. Began the sealing of the yang chakra of the Kyuubi. Hake no Fuin Shiki, 8 trigram seal. A seal that looked similar to Minato's seal appeared on Naruto. The Kyuubi looked at Minato with a feral look in his eye before thrashing around and roaring at the heavens. The Kyuubi began to shrink slowly as he was sealed into the small child. The Kyuubi looked at Minato hatefully, cursing him as he disappeared. Minato smiled. He had protected his family long enough, and would be seeing them for the last time. He felt his chakra disappearing and his body was completely numb now. He looked back as he could see the Shinigami about to cut his soul for him to devour. Then a large chakra wave blew across the 5 nations. Killer Bee looked up as he felt the large chakra enter their realm. Orochimaru looked up from his experiment as he felt the dense chakra blow through his lair. Yagura looked up from his Mizukage's spot with the Sanbi suddenly agitated. Danzo frowned and looked up at the sky. And the Shinigami was glaring at the source of the chakra blast. Susanoo, what have you done? You've brought an anomaly into this realm? And a demigod at that? The Shinigami bellowed. Minato was in shock. There was a child of a god somewhere in this realm. The Shinigami looked down on Minato. Consider yourself lucky, human. Urgent business has come up. You are free from my grasp. The Shinigami puts back Minato's soul into his body, and disappears afterwards. Minato slowly regained feeling in his body before collapsing to the ground next to Kushina and the newly made Jinchuriki. He slowly crawled over to the bodies on the ground and lay on the ground with them. Kushina was unconscious with chakra exhaustion, and Naruto was sleeping peacefully between her parents' arms. Minato smiled one last time, before giving into the darkness that was taking over his vision. Hiruzen came in after the barrier was taken down and saw the figure of 3 bodies lying next to each other. Hiruzen smiled. They were all alive. Land of Rivers. Kyoko Uzumaki was cold. She was one of the sole survivors of the fall of Uzushiogakure. Kyoko used to be a seal mistress in the study when her home got attacked. Now she wandered the 5 nations, to find a place to call home. Now she was staying in a small hotel, which barely suited her needs. Kyoko was lonely. She often daydreamed of being with someone or raising a child as her own. But that wish was nigh impossible. Kyoko sighed. She walked over to the small refrigerator where it contained 1 meal only. She pulled it out before heating it. Then she felt it, a massive chakra blast that filled her with euphoria and terror at the same time. Kyoko froze. Had the bandits found her? She stood very still trying to mask her chakra. Then she heard it, a crying sound, of a child. Kyoko tentatively opened the door. She looked right and left. Nothing. So where was the crying noise coming from? She looked down. She gasped. A small child wrapped in a blanket was laid right at her doorstep. The child had black tufts of hair with a slightly exotic tan. He was beautiful. Kyoko immediately fell in love with the child. She quickly brings in the child inside. What was a child doing at her doorstep? It was almost as if a god had answered her wishes. She glances down at the small child. She nestles him against her chest. He started to snuggle in closer to her chest before yawning with his cute little mouth and started sleeping. Kyoko knew at that moment she would protect him from anything that harmed this child. She looked at the basket in which the child was placed in. Nothing. She looked back at the boy. Now what to call you? She whispered. She stared at the child and noted how pure and innocent he seemed. Pure and innocent like snow. She smiled and stroked the child's head. She had gotten her idea for the name of her new child. Welcome home, Uzumaki Yukio. 4 years later. Ka-chan. A voice pierced the little cottage as a boy with black hair highlights ran into the room. Kyoko smiled at the scene. My little Yukio-kun, she screamed. They embraced each other fiercely before separating. The last 4 years had been eventful for the 28-year-old. She had raised little Yukio when she first found him outside of her hotel back in the Land of Rivers. Yukio was 3 foot 6 inches and had eyes that held so much emotion to them. It made other women, and herself, want to pinch his cheeks and glomp on him. He had a toothy grin with one of his front teeth missing. His skin was tanned and he looked exotic with his eyes finishing the image. His sea-green eyes always made Kyoko be drawn into them. Yukio was an exceptional boy. He was extremely intelligent and learned how to walk in 8 months, and spoke his first words a month later. Kyoko was so proud of Yukio when she saw him toddled toward her before saying Ka-chan, his first words. Yukio developed extremely quickly afterwards. He learned the alphabet and basic kanji only at 2 years old. Yukio started running around the household, while the young Uzumaki tried to hold on to her adopted son. Kyoko started teaching Yukio calligraphy at age 3, and soon he was writing words smoothly and clearly a year after. While she dearly loved Yukio, she began to notice strange things about him. Kyoko discovered her son's huge healing factor. She thought back as she remembered her adopted son's unique traits. It had been a clear day, and for once, Kyoko felt like she could relax. She had been taking Yukio to the park that day when it happened. Yukio was running around looking at the natural wildlife around him, and tripped on a rock that was jutting out of the ground. He landed on the ground, gaining a huge gash on his leg. Kyoko fussed about the wound. She was worried that it could get infected, and she didn't have anything on her to patch him up with, so she decided to clean the wound with some water from a nearby creek. When she poured the water to the wound, the flesh started knitting back together. Kyoko could see the little seams of skin knit back together and wash away the blood. Kyoko was shocked. Yukio looked at the newly healed leg before giving Kyoko a hug, reassuring her that he was all right. They had went back to their little cottage they had rented for the time being, and Kyoko put Yukio back in his bed for his nap. This left Kyoko wondering what she had seen. Yukio hasn't even unlocked his chakra, so Irio ninjutsu was out of the question. She wondered, was it in his genes? She took the dried blood of Yukio before putting it in a seal that analyzed everything that was placed on it. A Chokusetsu Bunseki Shiru, a level 4 seal that Kyoko invented. She was surprised to see the results of his DNA only having one side of information. The other side was simply not there. Kyoko wondered how this little boy was alive. Yukio had no prominent DNA that indicated a Kekkei Genkei, which also confused her greatly. How had he healed so quickly? She wondered. Kyoko kept watching Yukio for the time being to see if he would show any changes, but nothing out of the ordinary came up. Kyoko also learned that her son had an insatiable love of Pocky. Kyoko remembered the day she had given him Pocky. Yukio was only barely a year old when she gave him Pocky. He was crying very badly, and Kyoko panicked and stuck the nearest edible thing into his mouth. It was Pocky. When the Pocky touched his mouth, Yukio immediately shut up. And so forth, having given him a Pocky just to get him to shut up as a child seemed to affect him as he grew older. Kyoko didn't care much, except when she wanted him to eat regular food. Dear Kami, how she had to pin him down just to force feed him some vegetables. Kyoko herself had changed since she took in Yukio. She was dressed in a simple kimono that was versatile for seals and fighting, if it had to come down to it. She had her red hair in a single bun. She no jewelry and makeup, and she had a soft face that showed beauty. Kyoko smiled down at the little boy who was currently clinging onto her like his life depended on it. Kyoko forgot to say one more thing about Yukio. He was a mama's boy. He would do anything to get his mother's attention and helped her in any way a 4-year-old could help a full-grown woman. This made him all the cuter to Kyoko's eyes. Yukio spent a lot of time alone with his mother because they never had a permanent home. They were always traveling, and this made Yukio to have no time to make friends. This made him really lonely, but it was no matter, because he had his Ka-chan. Yukio was a peculiar boy, and most people would call him a prodigy. He understood much better when it came to studying and he excelled in his mother's teachings. Yukio hugged tightly his mother and took in her scent. She would always smell of oranges, and this is what he loved most about his mother. Not only was she the best, she smelled really nice too. Sometimes Yukio would just sleep with his mother just to get more of the scent she carried. Yukio looked up at his mother's vibrant purple eyes and hugged her again. Yukio, with a cheeky smile, gave her one of the most deadliest things he could do to his mother. He looked up with eyes watering like a helpless baby seal. Kyoko looked at this and crumbled. "What do you want, Sochi?" she asked. Yukio grinned at his mom before saying in a childish voice, "Could I have some Pocky?" Kyoko frowned at her son. "Sochi, what did we say about having Pocky?" she said with a stern tone. Yukio looked up at his mother. "Please?" Kyoko glared at Yukio before sighing. "Fine." She then proceeded to pull a box of Pocky out of her apron pocket and gave it to Yukio. Yukio gasped in delight before ripping the box open to grab a Pocky. He began to happily munch on them. Kyoko laughed as she ruffled his hair, making it even more messed up than it already was. "So, Yukio-chan, what did you do today?" she asked with a teasing manner. Yukio glared at his mother for using such a demeaning honorific on him. "I went outside in the field to explore Ka-chan. I found some flowers and even a little lake," he excitedly told his mother. Then he proceeded to munch on his Pocky. Kyoko laughed. She loved her son whenever he would do this. "So, Sochi, what do you want to do now?" Yukio grinned. "I want to learn how to fight Ka-chan." Kyoko froze. "Why would you want to do such a silly thing, Yukio-kun?" she asked him with a sweet, serious tone. "I want to be a hero and protect you, Ka-chan," Yukio boisterously said. Kyoko looked at Yukio before deciding that a little training wouldn't hurt, or would it? "Why all of the sudden do you want to learn how to fight, Sochi?" Kyoko asks again. This time Yukio looked sad. "I want to make all the bad men hunting Ka-chan go away," he blurted out loud. Kyoko's eyes had widened. He had known the reason why they always had to move around and never stay in one place. Since the fall of Uzushigakure, both shinobi, kunoichi, and samurai had been hunting her down to turn her into a breeding machine. Kyoko always was one step ahead of them, but there were times when she had run into bandits or shinobi that wanted her dead, or for their own personal gain. She had thought she had shielded all of this from Yukio-kun, but this was evidently not. Kyoko asked quietly, How did you learn about the bad, Sochi? Yukio looked worriedly at his mother before saying, Ka-chan, I'm not blind. I know why keep moving around. Kyoko sighed. Do you really want to start training Sochi? She asked him. Yukio answers with a curt nod. Kyoko smiled. I'll teach you tomorrow then Sochi. Now then let's start with your calligraphy practice. Konoha. Kushina was running around trying to get her 4-year-old daughter. Naruto was currently wearing a t-shirt that sported the Uzumaki symbol in the front. Her golden hair was tied into 2 ponytails and her bright cerulean eyes was filled with wonder. She had whisker marks upon her face showing the slight change of being a Jinchuriki's daughter. She had Kushina's pudgy face, which made her cute in every way. At least that was what Minato thought of. She really took after Kushina when it came to her personality. Naruto was loud and was a huge prankster. Talking about pranks, Minato was wondering what Naruto had done this time. Kushina walked into Minato's office. Minato almost died laughing. Her hair was currently sticky everywhere as it was coated in honey, and her face looked like some 2-year-old had drawn all over. Her previously green apron was replaced with bunch of little faces, which took Minato to realize that it was his face. Naruto was being held by Kushina, as Kushina stomped her way towards Minato. Minato stared innocently at her. Kushina wasn't fooled. She could see the laughter in his eyes. A vein started throbbing on her forehead as her hair started rising behind her to create a visage of the 9 tails. Minato was pretty sure he saw the Shinigami was back to claim his soul. Naruto giggled as she hung by her hip from Kushina's arms. Kushina grew even more agitated. Masumi, she growled in a threatening tone. What did we say about pranking Ka-chan? She whispered out in a sweet voice. Heavy waves of killing intent flooded the room. Kushina whirled around to face Minato. And you are the one that gave her that pranking book. Chakra chains started to fill the room. Screams of both a man and a little girl could be heard all throughout the Hokage's compound. The red-hot habanero was back. Both Minato and Naruto were sitting down at Ichiraku's ramen as they ate. Naruto was slurping up her ramen, as seeing she had inherited her mother's love for the salty dish. Minato was slowly eating his miso ramen as he watched his daughter eat up the ramen like it was her last meal on Earth. Minato himself hasn't changed much from the night of the Kyuubi attack, but the effect of the Shiki Fujin seal was noticeable. He was the Jinchuriki of the yin part of the Kyuubi and his daughter was the yang part Jinchuriki. This also caused a significant issue with his chakra coils. The sudden influx of chakra made his coils stretch out much farther than normal, and they had Tsunade to hold them together just enough for them not to break. This didn't bother him much anymore, but he still got phantom pains sometimes. Minato grimaced as he felt the throbbing pains of his whole body engulf him for a second. Minato also changed his attire a bit. No longer wearing a Anbu-style clothing inside, he started wearing a kimono that still allowed to fight freely, but was incredibly comfortable. His hair was slightly longer and shaggier, making him look like he just woke up. He smiled as he rubbed his daughter's head as she burped, signaling the 15 ramen she had eaten. Seeing his daughter eat ramen almost put the Akamichi to shame. Naruto looked up at Minato with her innocent eyes and tilted her head in question. Minato spoke first. Never grow old, Naruto. Always stay young, he asked her. Naruto looked confusedly at Minato. Toussaint? She questioned. Nothing, it's nothing. Hey, you know you shouldn't prank your Ka-chan like that, you know? I get punished too if you start pranking her. He scolded her lightly. Naruto pouted. Minato laughed at her expression. As they were spending their time away, they failed to notice the withering glares that Naruto was gaining from the merchants of the marketing district. The Uchiha compound. A small child was sprinting through the streets of the Uchiha compound. He had a small frame, almost petite like a girl, but if you saw him, you could definitely tell that he was a boy. He was wearing all black with a big red Uchiha fan embroidered into the back of his shirt. He passed by as many other Uchiha members bowed in his direction. Sasuke Uchiha burst into his home. He was breathing hard from running through the compound. A woman poked her head out of the kitchen. Sasuke-kun, what did he say about barging in like that? Sasuke tried to argue back, but before he could, his brother appeared in front of him and poked his forehead. Itachi Uchiha had an amused look in his eyes before looking at their mother, Makoto. Sasuke rubbed his bruised forehead and glared at his brother. I see Sasuke-kun wants to train with me, mother. I will go out, Itachi states. Makoto looks outside. Okay, but just come in before it gets dark. Dinner's almost ready. Makoto replies. Itachi then proceeds to take out Sasuke to the big lake to practice their clan's renowned jutsu. Itachi performs the hand seals before blowing out a fireball that raced across the lake. He sees the gleam in Sasuke's eyes and proceeds to teach him. Sasuke tries and copies his brother's hand motions, before blowing out a small flame from his mouth. Sasuke, miffed on how small it was, tries over and over again, while Itachi just sits by him watching his brother try a new jutsu for the first time. As they keep on training, they failed to spot a man wearing a white mask and sporting a single Sharingan eye. He glances at the boys before disappearing in a swirling vortex that originated from his eye. Land of Fire. What Yukio felt today was excitement. Today was the day that his Ka-chan was going to teach him how to fight. Kyoko had brought Yukio out to the fields behind their cottage. Kyoko now looked sternly at Yukio. Now Sochi, if you want to fight, you must tell me the reason you want to fight. The true reason. Yukio looked defiantly up at his Ka-chan. I will fight for the people in my life. I will fight for my future friends and you Ka-chan, he exclaimed. Kyoko looked proudly at her son. Good, she said with a smile. Then she looked at him again. Now I want you to remember, I am your sensei now. I am now not your mother but your sensei. Yukio nodded at her with a curt nod. Now I want you to give me 100 push-ups and 10 laps around the field. 2 years later, the slight wind breeze ruffled the hair of a small child with jet black hair. His form was covered by a ragged cloak, and was accompanied by another person who was twice as tall as him. His green eyes twinkled as they walked down the road. The sky was blue, with no cloud to be seen, and the forest gave a lush green color. His eyes went all over the place to pick up the many lush colors and the lively animals that spotted the place. He reached his hands out to feel the chakra around him. He remembered the first time when he had unlocked his chakra. Flashback. Yukio breathed in and out as he made the ram seal to feel for his chakra. Kyoko looked closely at her son as he started to feel for his chakra. Yukio breathed in and out again to look for there. He had brushed against an incredible warm feeling, and as he latched onto that feeling, he slowly dragged it out. Kyoko gasped as she felt his chakra come out of his body. It was such a dense and massive feeling that even without a sensor, people could feel his chakra. As he began to draw out more and more, the ground and air around him began to warp. Such big reserves for a small child. Kyoko thought as she saw his chakra warp the basis of reality itself. Now with insane levels of chakra, Kyoko stopped Yukio. She went on and on the basis of chakra exercises, training him whenever she could with the chakra training exercises. Yukio remembered the day he tried water walking. Water had always been Yukio's favorite subject, and the easiest. He felt the most comfortable in this element, and whenever he was around water, he felt called to, almost like something was calling him. Yukio had tentatively stepped on the water, before fully walking on it. The water seemed to lap at his feet happily like a dog to his master. Yukio giggled. He had done it. Yukio began to run across the lake, surprising his mother to be able to complete the chakra exercise so quickly. Yukio smiled at the memory of him completing the water walking exercise at one go. His Ka-chan had been so proud of him that day. Kyoko looked down at her son as they walked toward Uzushiogakure. Kyoko didn't want to reveal it, but she had limited time on the world. She quickly wanted to give Yukio the best advantages he could get, and get him safely into a ninja village, where he could grow up safely. Kyoko caught a sickness that was incurable, and was dying from it. She didn't want Yukio worrying from the bad news, so she tried to keep her condition to herself. Kyoko was suddenly racked with coughs as she walked down the path. She brought her hands away to reveal blood. Kyoko wore a grim look before reassuring her son. Kyoko then looked at her son and marveled how much he had grown. Yukio's body was well toned from the times he and his mother would train and study. He wasn't as ripped as the Raikage or any of the other Jonin you would find in other villages, but he was quite strong for his age. Yukio was incredibly good at seals and was a prodigy at them. Only 2 years of Uzumaki Fuinjutsu studies put him at the mastery level of 3. He could soon be a full-fledged Fuinjutsu master in another 10 years. Yukio had also picked up more than his mother's Fuinjutsu. He took on a new taijutsu style that was experimental during the days of Uzushiogakure. Kyoko happened to be the few ones that trained in this style of taijutsu. The taijutsu, called whirlpool style, included the centripetal usage of his legs, and was used to adapt to opponents' stances. Yukio fully hasn't this newly created fighting style, but it would be feared later on in the great nations. Yukio also took a liking to swords. Being a demigod meant a natural understanding with weapons. He practiced kenjutsu with his mother, being somewhat proficient at the Uzumaki's Shinigami no Odori, which included them to use the sword to the fullest. It would allow the user to cut the body with numerous fashion and had a high defense as well as offense. Yukio, walking with his ka-chan, pulled out a box of Pocky as they walked down the road. Kyoko smiled at Yukio as he happily nibbled at the treat. Yukio turned to Kyoko and offered one to Kyoko, but she declined. At least he cared for her. They started talking to each other, talking about Kyoko's old past life. They kept walking until they walked up to a boat. They got on and started rowing toward the island that was looming ahead. Kyoko held her breath as she rowed closer to the place she called home for the first 8 years of her life. They docked their boat and started walking towards the destroyed gates that held the Uzumaki clan symbol on it. They had arrived at Uzushiogakure, a deep part of the mountain of Konoha. There is a slight opening that is hidden with a strong genjutsu and is patrolled 24/7. In their ninjas wearing blank masks that only had the kanji for root on them roamed the inner workings of the secret tunnels. One of the ninjas was hurrying to a room in one of those tunnels. Danzo-sama, a ninja with a blank white mask, bows in front of an old man. The old man was half covered in bandages, almost giving him the impression of a mummy. His right eye was covered with bandages. His arm, bandaged too, was gripping the armrest of his throne like he was anticipating great news from the lone ninja in the room. Which he was. Danzo-sama, we have picked up the trail of Kyoko Uzumaki once more. The ninja spoke monotonously. Danzo's single good eye widened, and a smirk adorned the old warhawk. Have you confirmed this intel route? Danzo asked with a gravelly voice. Yes, Danzo-sama. After we lost her trail 6 years ago, we finally have tracked her moving. The unknown ninja spoke once again. Danzo grinned. He was very pleased with the outcome of this. He asked, what has become of our target for the past 6 years? The ninja shifted and spoke with a clear voice. She has seemed to give birth to a child, Danzo-sama. Danzo's remaining eye grew in size with this revelation. So the Uzumaki has given birth to an heir? He questioned. Danzo nodded off the ninja who had given him the report. Danzo was alone with his thoughts, thinking about this new character that he could implement probably into root. Danzo thought, I must get the Uzumaki child into root. Danzig called upon 2 root agents. I want you to follow Kyoko Uzumaki and tell me what she is doing for the next year. Tell me of their routine so that we may capture the next Uzumaki heir. The root ninjas saluted Danzo before disappearing to who knows where. Danzig smiled. Yes, he was going to have a hold of the Uzumaki and the Uchiha. Hokage Tower. It was a normal day in the shopping district of the village. The sky was abnormally blue and birds were chirping away. Light winds blew through the village as the civilians walked through enjoying the day. Couples were snuggling or going out to enjoy the day, and families were out to take advantage of it too. One little girl, however, took advantage of this day, sprinting around the village. To a shinobi's eyes, it would look like a small blur ran in front of them, and to the civilian's eyes, woe looked like a bolt of orange lighting. She had golden locks that reached to the base of her neck. The cerulean blue that shimmered with jubilance. The golden locks spilled behind her as she sprinted through the streets. Her shirt was stained with multitude of paint stains from the 2 years of pranking and clung to her petite form as she ran. Her gray shinobi sandals kicked up the dirt and sent people coughing. Naruko Namikaze burst into the Hokage Tower as she ran to her father's office. Oto-san, she screamed as she jumped into the laps of the yellow-haired ninja. Minato smiled as the small 6-year-old child rammed into him as he was signing paperwork. So, what does my little princess want now? He asked. Naruko pulled a face to being called a princess. Oto-san tilde, you know that I don't like that. Minato just laughed at his daughter's expression. It was scrunched up with annoyance and was slightly red with a blush. Her cheeks puffed up as she stared balefully at her father. Naruko was annoyed at her father for calling her princess. She asked, Oto-san, can I please go in the academy now? I so bored, she begged. Minato sighed. Naruto had been begging him for the past month for trying to be a ninja, but he was worried that she might hurt herself or worse. Naruto, he started out, but Naruto interrupted him. Oto-san tilde, she whined. Minato glared sternly at his daughter and Naruto shot back that look right back at Minato. Having fun, eh Minato? A voice broke the staring contest between father and daughter. Jiraiya was leaning against the window as he watched his student bicker with his daughter. Naruto looked overjoyed to see her godfather again. Minato looked relieved too. Sensei, thank God, you have to talk Naruto out for trying the academy a hand stopping Minato from speaking more. Jiraiya looked Minato with a serious face. I think we should let Naruto attend the academy. Naruto gasped with joy as she rushed in to hug the teacher of her father. Thank you, Ero Sennin. She squealed before sticking out her tongue at her father. Jiraiya let out an annoyed, hey, before grumbling on about disrespectful students and their daughters. Minato was glaring at his teacher. And why exactly should I do that, Ero-sensei? Jiraiya glared back at Minato before going on, Minato. Kids wanting to be a kunoichi. As a father you should be supporting her in every way you think could help her survive in this god-forsaken world. Minato looked down. I know sensei, but what happens if something bad happens to her? Jiraiya smiled gently. Minato, our very job is dangerous. Things will happen to us shinobi and we can't do anything about it. But if you let Naruto become kunoichi, we can teach her to defend herself. Minato sighed. Alright, I'll let Naruto join in the academy next year. Naruto jumped up and down with the prospect of becoming a kunoichi. Jiraiya chuckled at this before telling Naruto to run along. Jiraiya watched as the small child ran out of the office, before turning to Minato with a serious face. Minato seeing this stood straight up and went into what Kushina would call it, his Hokage mode. Jiraiya looked into Minato's eyes before stating, Minato, I found another Uzumaki. Minato's eyes grew as he processed this information. We got to tell Kushina that she has a living relative. Jiraiya looked panicked at Minato's words. Minato, no, we can't reveal that theirs is another Uzumaki out there. Especially this one. She is incredibly invaluable to the other villages, and just by telling your wife, we can accidentally start off a wild war between villages. And what would Danzo do? He would probably somehow get the Uzumaki roped into his root program or something. We cannot allow this to happen. Do you understand? Jiraiya sighed. Minato looked at Jiraiya before slumping into his chair. What do? We have to wait. Jiraiya just stated. Jiraiya sighed. I also have word about a new organization called Akatsuki that has a gathering of S-ranked missing nen. Minato frowned. Are they a threat? He asked. Jiraiya shook his head before saying, not now, but something tells me they are going to be big in the future. Uchiha Compound. A cloaked figure stood over the roofs of the compounds hidden in the shadows. A single Sharingan eye scanned the whole area before disappearing into the air. Itachi Uchiha, now in Anbu, was frowning as he felt the eyes of someone, or in this case, staring right into him. He quickly pulled out a wave of chakra before determining nothing was in his vicinity. He quickly ran down the streets of the compound before entering his home. Makoto Uchiha was a calm and rational woman. She enjoyed raising 2 children and, while sometimes, a husband. Makoto was finishing up dinner when she heard someone enter the household. When she saw Itachi, she smiled and asked Itachi about his day. While Itachi loved his mother, he wasn't really much of a talker and just answered with a simple, HN. This made Makoto slightly angry since her son just told her off like that. With a sweet smile, she began glare at Itachi before saying, Dear, did you have a good day? Itachi, obviously shaken by the visage his mother giving him, replied with a hasty, Yes, Ka-chan. Makoto then let go of her scary sight before smiling at Itachi. Then go wash up and get your brother. Itachi nodded to his mother, before running off to find his younger brother. Later Itachi found him by the Uchiha compound personal lake trying to create the Kaiten Gokakyu no Jutsu at the scale of which Itachi and his father Fugaku could. Sasuke, dissatisfied with the results, tried mold his chakra again before a hand came out of nowhere to get a hold of his shoulder. Itachi, smiling at his brother, was easily impressed at the rate which he was progressing with the Kaiten Gokakyu no Jutsu. Sasuke, suddenly full of joy again, full-on hugged his older brother. "Ni-san, you're back." Itachi poked his brother's forehead affectionately before speaking. "Sasuke, you want some help?" Sasuke, with a stuck-up attitude that would have made any Uchiha proud of, said arrogantly, "I'm an Uchiha, I don't need help." Itachi looked at his brother with a slight smile of amusement, spoke softly. "Oto, sometimes when you need help, it's best to find from others rather than to find it on your own." Then he proceeded to explain what Sasuke had been doing wrong with the jutsu. "You need to mix the chakra with the air before you breathe it out, Oto. You simply are firing the jutsu before you give it a chance to mix." Itachi explained to Sasuke. Sasuke, with a light of understanding, tried again, but this time he took longer to let the chakra mix with the air before breathing it out. This led to an awesome fireball that grew to the size of his house. Sasuke, obviously pleased with his fireball, hugged his brother in thanks. Itachi held a gentle smile as he looked at his brother before ushering him home, so they could eat. Uzushiyogakure. A deep mist rolled over a land destroyed by 3 different countries in a single day. That same mist revealed 2 people, a tall woman and a small boy, walking down the devastated roads of Uzu. Kyoko and Yukio kept on trudging through Uzu as they took in all of the destruction of the now-dead village. Kyoko ran her fingers over the small bridge that they were crossing as she remembered the route that they were taking. Flashback. "Kyoko, come on, let's go play ninja." A small boy's voice cried out to her. A slightly taller girl ran up behind the boy. "Nagato, slow down." Nagato giggled. His bright violet eyes shone with happiness. "Come on, Nei-chan, let's go play." Kyoko caught up to the boy and started breathing hard. Nagato and Kyoko had been running all over the village. The small 3-year-old had been surprisingly really fast despite the small toddler legs that he carried. Kyoko had been 8 at the time. She had just started her kenjutsu training from her father and was becoming one of the village's proud fuinjutsu mistresses. Kyoko bopped her little brother's head. Nagato whined in pain. "Nei-chan tilde," he complained as he rubbed his head. "Nagato, we need to get back home. I have studying to do. I will play with you later, and it's late out. Let's go home." She reprimanded her little brother. Nagato pouted as he nodded, disappointed that his sister would not play with him. Kyoko smiled as his pouting face. "Would you like a piggyback ride back home, Nagato?" she asked. Nagato gasped. His eyes filled with a glimmering light. "Yes," he shouted, leaving his sister laughing at his reaction towards her. As Kyoko took off, she was happy with her little brother and never wanted the day to end. Yukio watched with worry as he saw his mother start crying. It was slow at first, but it steadily grew into a stream of tears that continuously fell. Kyoko regretted that day, the day before the attack. She wanted so badly to take back that day just to spend more time with her brother. She wanted to hear him laugh at her jokes, and she wanted to hold him close once more, like she had done long ago. But after the invasion of Uzushiyogakure, she had lost contact with her brother and had no idea what had happened to him and her family. With bloodshot eyes, she looked over at the spot where her sensei used to teach her the arts of fuinjutsu. Arashi sensei used to be an amazing teacher. He was almost like an older brother that she never had. He was funny and surprisingly young. Kyoko couldn't lie, she had a crush on her sensei at one point. But now all that remained was remains of a house that once stood. Flashback. Arashi sensei. Kyoko called out to the house which her sensei was staying at. Thumps of scrambling footsteps could be heard as the eccentric fuinjutsu master fumbled around to get to his student. The door opened up to reveal a man in his 20s. His red hair was all over the place, and his eyes held a twinge of annoyance and tiredness. When he looked down to see his prodigal student, his lit up and he dragged his student in. Arashi looked questioningly at Kyoko and asked, "What's going on, Kyoko?" Kyoko sighed in exasperation. "Sensei, have you forgotten what day it is and what you promised me?" She glared at her forgetful sensei as she spoke to him in a tired tone. Arashi looked at her with a confused look on his face before a sudden dawning of understanding took over his face. Arashi paled. "Shit," he muttered. Kyoko tapped her little 7-year-old foot. "Well?" She waited for her answer. Arashi laughed nervously at his little student. "I didn't forget, Kyo-chan," he stuttered. Kyoko raised an eyebrow. Arashi broke under the cold gaze that his student was giving him, and fell down asking for forgiveness. Baka-sensei. A loud voice could be heard through the village. Few of the elders chuckled at the relationship of the teacher and student. Time skip. I still can't believe you forgot the very day that I was looking forward to other than my birthday and Nagano-chan's birthday. Kyoko huffed as she walked towards the festival. Arashi lagged behind trying to pacify his young student's anger. Kyoko looked balefully at her sensei. You better get me something good at this festival, sensei. Calm pen sa tion. Kyoko accented every word while sticking her hand out as if Arashi would hand her something. Arashi's sweat dropped as he followed his student around. I will get you that new sealing kit that you always asked for, he replied. Kyoko gasped as stars twinkled in her eyes. Really? Arashi smiled at the reaction he had gotten out of his little student. Kyoko whooped as she sped off into the festival, which was a kind of fuinjutsu convention. Kyoko chuckled as more tears sprung from her eyes. She had remembered the day her sensei had taken her to the fuinjutsu convention. She looked down at the near worn-out brush that hung from the side in her cloak. She had never used another brush from that day on. Yukio didn't know what to do as he saw his mother laughing and crying at the same time. He knew that this place was important to his mother, so he let her have a moment before tugging his mother's cloak, signaling that he wanted to move on. Kyoko looked down at Yukio as he looked up with a concerned face at his mother. She ruffled his hair with a reassuring nod before walking down the desolate road. They entered a house where it wasn't remotely broken down. Kyoko slowly entered this home with a hesitant step, before looking around and breathing in the musty air of the house that had been unoccupied for 20 years. Kyoko spotted a broken frame on the ground before picking it up. She brushed off the broken glass and dirt. The picture held 4 figures. The smiling face of Kyoko and her younger brother Nagato. The 2 adults were smiling like they were sharing a really funny secret. Tears fell on the picture as Kyoko remembered the day when they took this family photo. Flashback. Nate-chan, come on. A small voice pierced the beautiful air as Kyoko's family was about to take their family photo. Kyoko was busy trying to tie her hair in a bun when 2 soft hands took her hair and started putting them in a bun. Kyoko looked up as she spotted her mother smiling down at her. Ka-chan, she exclaimed. Kyoko's mother looked affectionately at her and told her, you know, you're becoming more and more beautiful every day. Something needs or later your papa might have to fend off other boys from you. She teased. Kyoko grew bright red as she listened to her mother's words. Ka-chan tilde, she exclaimed at her laughing mother. Come on, Kyoko. Your papa and Nagato are waiting for you. Kyoko's mother told her. They all huddled up next to each other before activating the camera that took their picture. Yukio looked questioningly at the photo before looking at his mother. Ka-chan? Who are those people in the photo? Where are we? Kyoko looked at Yukio with the same smile her mother had given her on the day of the invasion. Yukio-chan, this was my family a long time ago when I used to live here. This man was your Oji-san and this woman was your Oba-san. This is me and this was your Oji-san when he was 3 years old. Yukio looked at the picture with a new light, as it showed the family that he was supposed to have. Where are they, Ka-chan? He asked. Kyoko faced her son and told him the most innocent answer she could think of. Your Oji-san and Oba-chan are asleep. Your Oji-san has just lost Yukio. Yukio looked at his mother with a sad face. He knew what she had. What by sleeping? He had seen few people fall asleep by his mother's hand multiple times by accident. So they are dead, he said with a blunt tone. Kyoko winced as she failed in telling her son that they are dead. Yukio furrowed his brows. Then what happened to Oji-san? He asked. Kyoko smiled with a sad tone. I don't know, Yukio. I don't know. Kyoko sighed as she looked over the damage of the house. She thought to herself and how they were going to live here for the next few years. Yukio, she called out. Yes, Ka-chan? He answered. Unpack your stuff. You can explore what remains and we can live here for a while. Kyoko said while still taking in the deathly quiet household that had used to be full of laughter and happiness. Yukio nodded before unsealing all of his belongings and found an empty room to set up his stuff in. Yukio then left his mother to her memories before venturing out the house. He placed a simple tracking seal on the house so he doesn't get lost and then ventured out of the house. If you looked down on the ground where Yukio Uzumaki was standing, one would find almost nothing. It's been 22 years since the invasion of Uzu since anyone has stepped into the royal grounds of the Whirlpool country. The desolate grounds that used to house many Uzumakis were now all bones and ashes. The wall themselves had been crushed to rubble, as it held against a barrage of offensive jutsu. But after 22 years, an Uzumaki and her adopted son set foot into the destroyed country of Uzu. Yukio all by himself was navigating the barren ground of destroyed buildings. Homes where families used to spend time together was now dust in the wind. Monasteries where the great wise ones prayed was razed to the ground. The desolate roads of Uzu slightly put Yukio off. The harsh winds seemed to cut into his very skin as he walked. Amongst the heavy winds, something pulled Yukio to a source. Yukio felt a slight pull, almost like his center of gravity was in that direction. Yukio jumped over large pieces of debris. He ventured deeper and deeper into the parts of Uzu. The land seemed to give a harsh glare at the small child that looked around. Yukio could feel the dark miasma that permeated the air. Then he felt it. He could feel something calling to him, that was beckoning him, whispering to him to find it. But Yukio didn't know what this was. When he reached a certain spot, the heartbeat stopped, leaving Yukio to wonder what had happened to the strange calling. When he looked around, he found that what surrounded him was the last remains of a temple of sorts. He could make out the intricate patterns that adorned the marble, which was in pieces when found, and he could see some jade jewelry and other fancy cosmetics lying around. Broken pieces of jade littered the grounds as Yukio looked around. They looked expensive, but Yukio felt like if he picked them up, horrible things might befell upon him. With his slightly pudgy fingers he sent a little of his chakra in a slight burst to sense the area around him. To his surprise he felt foreign chakra pulse back at him from the ground which he was standing on. He quickly crouched down and dusted off the floor to clear the dust and rubble away from the surface he was standing on. After brushing away the rubble, Yukio found something that had surprised him. A seal, covered the floor with intricate brush strokes that covered the entrance, stared at the young boy. He could tell that this was advanced fuinjutsu. The kanji and the squiggles just made Yukio's head turn. Even though he had studied the art under his mother for 2 years, he could only make out the seals for defense and protect. The pulse was back, and was ever increasing now. It was almost painful for the boy to forget. The pulsing beat shook Yukio through his core as he laid his hand over the intricate seals that held something. Once his hands touched the seals, however, the seals started moving, unraveling at speeds that Yukio never saw. Then they stopped abruptly before glowing a soft white color. Seal glowed before revealing the floor a small hatch that it covered. The marble retracted in a spiral formation before releasing dust that made Yukio cough. When the dust cleared he could see the nigh empty room before him. Yukio hesitated as to entering a room where it was dark. Yukio gulped down his fear before dropping down. As if responding to his chakra, the vault soon flooded with lights coming from torches that adorned the walls. Yukio looked around with wonder as his eyes filled with pictures and figures that showed great battles. His fingers hovered over the drawings, beings and creatures fighting. Yukio kept on looking over the pictures before his eyes came across a scroll sitting on an altar at the end of the room. Unbeknownst to Yukio, a pair of rippling blue eyes stared at the boy, watching his every move. The walls of the vault gave an questioning vibe, almost as if the vault itself was testing the young boy. Yukio touched at the walls, and was sucked into a vision. Vision. Unknown. When Yukio woke up, the first thing he thought was the sea. He could smell the sea, the salty and musty scent that he was so familiar with. He could hear the raging waters crashing onto the rocks, carving the rock to sand over and over again. The second thing Yukio thought was the rain. The drops of rain had adorned his vision with the heavy sense that he was in a very bad storm. The kind that sent trees uprooted and destroyed homes with a simple rush of water. The wind was howling in his ears, almost pain-inducing sounds whipped through the air. Yukio looked around and discovered that he had woken up on a coastline. The wind was buffeting his hair around, while the rain had not drenched him one bit. Yukio only found that odd for a while before seeing a man with a sword seeming to yell at the sea. The man was tall and very muscular. Yukio could see his arms flex and show rippling amounts of muscle. He wore a bright blue kimono and held a katana and was waving it at the sea. Then Yukio saw it. A large 8-headed monster loomed in the sea, his titanic heads barely touching the clouds themselves. Its 8 heads swayed back and forth, almost giving it a hypnotic look if not for the cold stares he saw from all the 16 eyes. They were yellow with slitted eyes, and seemed to poisoning the very ground that they layer their eyes on. The creature itself was emitting so much killing intent, that it made Yukio want to roll up and die. The man was faring much better than him. He held his sword confidently and was shouting at the beast, who looked pissed at the man. He could hear the deafening roars of the monster as it growled in anger and annoyance. The man seemed to be laughing at the discomfort the creature was showing. His face was glowing with humor, as his sea-black hair billowed in the sea's wind. Yukio wanted to call out to the man, telling him to run away from the beast, but something held him up. Something told him that he shouldn't interfere. Just as he hesitated, the man launched himself at the large beast at impressive speeds. The heads recoiled back and poised to strike the man. A single head shot down and crashed into the very waves of the sea, sending a great spray of water. When the head landed, the very earth seemed to shake, splitting the ground. Nothing in its way should have lived, and yet the man was standing at the base of the head of the creature. He raised his sword before slashing across the very creature's neck and sending the head rolling. The blood-curdling roar from the remaining 7 heads only intensified the killing intent of the beast. By this time Yukio was seeing all the ways he was dying by the beast's mouth. Yukio soon snapped out of this as the man charged at the beast with a fearsome war cry. With awe, Yukio saw the man's swordsmanship. His sword glided around and struck at the beast with the strength of typhoons. Every time he swung his blade, a gust of wind was felt all the way to Yukio. The beast, seeming to grow more and more angry, seemed to be striking at the man in the world's most deadly dance. Its giant fangs dripped with poison that caused the great seas to boil up. After what seemed like an eternity of fighting, the beast was down to 1 head. Its face was growling with anger, but at the same time, Yukio saw something different about the beast. It had felt afraid, very afraid. The man wasn't faring so well also. His body was torn up with the many times the beast had managed to cut him with its fangs. But curiously, the man did not bleed blood, but a golden substance. His golden blood stained his blue kimono. The kimono itself did not look like what he hours before. The top half was completely obliterated, showing the muscles of the man and the hundreds of scars that lined the man. Each scar told of the many battles the man had faced. His eyes finally being shown to Yukio was rippling with power. His rippling eye pattern was not forgotten by Yukio. The blue rippling eyes stared at the beast with enough power that made Yukio feel like an infinitesimal speck in the universe. The beast itself, bleeding its poisonous blood, was growling at the man. It opened its maw and spoke. Godling, I will not go down without a fight. Man stared impassively at the beast, bellowing with a deep voice. It over Orochi. I will kill you and scatter your essence through space. The beast, now known as Orochi, hissed at the god, before slyly lunging at the god before biting his fang once more into the god. The god roared in pain before grabbing his sword tightly and lobbing off the final head. Orochi's body collapsed with no more head to support the body. His flesh steamed with an acrid smell and dissolved. The god hobbled down the rocks to the flesh, which was currently disintegrating. His gaping hole in his shoulder was bleeding heavy amounts of gold, before closing up, leaving a bloodied skin that showed a huge scar. The god seemed to look for something before grabbing something in the midst of the flesh. He pulled out a blade, a long gleaming chikuto, before walking out of the battlefield. Yukio gaped at the feat the man had done before feeling the rush of being whisked away. Unknown. Yukio woke up this time to smell the ungodly fire. He woke up to black fire raging the forest in which he woke up. He could smell the acrid fires and the flesh burning. It was overpowering almost to Yukio, but he powered through the smell. Yukio looked around and saw what almost shattered his 6-year-old mind. A giant monster, a demon with 1 eye, was roaring at 2 figures that stood in the way of the demon. The demon had a single giant eye showing the same rippling pattern with something that looked like commas in the rippling patterns. The only other difference with the god he had seen earlier was that the eyes was colored red. The beast was white in color and had 10 swishing tails, and its mouth was gaping with multitudes of sharp white teeth. It made Yukio think of a shark. The 2 men in front of the demon seemed to exude a strange but powerful aura. The man on the left held a black staff with reins, and the man on the right held a black staff with a crosspiece at the top. The man with the ringed staff had on a trench coat with 9 commas on his back and an eye with a rippling pattern above it. The tension between the three figures was incredible. Their white hair billowed in the non-existent wind, giving them an almost godly look. At last the man with the ringed staff yelled out to the beast. At least that's what it looked like to Yukio. His words were lost in the winds, before the demon roared at them once more. The only thing Yukio could hear was the crackling sound of fire raging around him. Then the demon roared again before collecting dark energy in its mouth and sending a dark beam of energy crashing into the two men, intending to obliterate them. One of the men jumped out of the way of the beam, while the other man took the brunt of the beam. An explosion appeared from the point of impact, generating typhoon levels of winds that whistled around Yukio. From the explosion the man was still standing, but with 7 swords, impaled in the ground. He was carrying a sword with scales and a giant mouth. The sword was gladly munching the air around it and was consuming the surrounding energy of the blast. Then the man grabbed a sword that was in the shape of a giant shield, before sending a pulses of energy into the sword. Then the man proceeded to throw all 8 blades into the air, and the man that dodged the blast jumped up to the blades and grabbed a sword that looked like the biggest needle that Yukio had ever seen. Then he grabbed an axe blade that was attached to a hammer, and stabbed the beast with the needle-like blade before hammering on the needle with the hammer at the end of the axe. The demon howled in pain and annoyance as it started to shift in form. The tails retracted into the back of the demon and the single giant eye that adorned its face shrunk into an eye and the forehead of a woman. The woman had a regal look with no eyebrows, and had 2 red dots on her forehead. When she opened her 2 eyes, pale lavender eyes pierced the very soul of Yukio. Yukio shivered because at that exact moment, he had felt like they had made eye contact. The woman raised her hands before shooting out long projectiles of bone that pierced the tree that was behind the man with the staff that had a crosspiece. The tree started to crumble into dust before being blown away by the winds. The long needle still piercing the woman pinned down the woman who had tried to wrench the weapon out of her abdomen. At this moment the man with the ringed staff took his chance to raise a sword to the heavens. Lightning struck the sword before the sword split in 2. The 2 lightning-infused blades struck the woman, making her shriek in agony. Then the man with the cross-pieced staff raised a giant blade that looked fit to decapitate things than be wielded. He rushed in at the woman and cleanly cut through the woman's body, flinging golden blood, which became absorbed into the blade. The bisection continued to bleed before closing up like it had never happened. The woman then began to turn back into the demonic form. Her 10 tails swished around her randomly as if they had minds of their own, almost hypnotizing Yukio. Her tails flicked away the 2 men, before ripping out the needle from her body. The blades clattered on the sides of the forest men stood back up nodding to each other, before rushing into battle once more. This time grabbing the blade that looked like a giant brush, the man hacked away at the oncoming tails that assailed both men. He mouthed out some words before sending a huge pulse of chakra that seemed to repel every tail that came towards him. The demon roared in annoyance before shifting back in her woman form. She started to rip the very air and shot a bone spike into the dark abyss, which reappeared right next to the man with the ringed staff. The man twists his body in a way that made the spike miss him. He rushed back in with clear intent to defeat the demon in the woman's form. He slams his hand in unison with the other man, who seemed to reappear behind the woman before holding her down. The man with the ringed staff proceeds to pull away his hand, dragging along a huge mass of bubbling chakra. The man seemed to struggle holding apart the body, which grew into a large wooden beast with 10 closed eyes. The bubbling chakra writhed in the man's grasp, struggling to get back in the giant wooden beast. The man grimaces and shouts at the other man. This time, Yukio hearing him. "Buy me some time, Homura." The man shouts to the other man. The man, now dubbed Homura, nods at the man holding the bubbling chakra, and pulses more chakra that caused the beast's body slam down into the ground. The man with ringed staff then slams his hands together, and the bubbling chakra floods into the man's body. The chakra rushed into the body, leaving behind a seal pattern, 16 points, adorning the seal. Then he grabs his 8th sword, a regular katana, before inscribing seal patterns on the sword's blade. Then he proceeds to seal away the blade, and look back at the beast, which was slowly losing its eyes. At the last moment, it transformed back into the woman, as she faced the two men once more. Her face, filled with rage and panic, shoots out once more, trying to gut the two men, but the both dodged, this time both of them yelling out two words that made the woman raise her eyes in shock. Chibaku Tensai. Once the words were uttered, rocks and surrounding materials rumbled before breaking apart into parts that slowly rose around, gradually gaining speed, which gathered around the woman, sealing her into a huge pile of rocks, floating in the air. The woman then transformed back into the beast, with now only sporting one eye, and tried to break out of the gathering all of rocks. Her attempts proved futile as the mass of rocks grew once more, floating in the sky, now turning into the moon. Yukio watched with wonder as more and more rocks piled onto the mass, but not realizing a large rocks hurtling behind him. The world became dark again as Yukio's vision was blurred from the rocks. Yukio woke up with a start, discovering that he was laying on the ground of the vault. The outside world seeming the same, as no time passed when Yukio looked into the past memories of the world. Unknown to Yukio, he now had a marking on his back that glowed faintly, in the form of a blue dragon, before disappearing from sight. Yukio shook the cold feeling from his body and proceeded towards the scroll that was being held in the stone statue's hands. He carefully picked it up, hoping not to trigger some alarms, and proceeded to open it. The scroll itself felt old, as the paper had a musty smell, the kind of smell that would come from paper that was in a dark, damp corners, and was brittle to the touch. The scroll felt cold, as seeing it had never touched the hands of the living for who knows how long. Yukio held his breath as he unraveled the scroll. A single seal adorned the paper. A simple storage seal was in the middle of the scroll. Yukio examined the scroll before adding his chakra into the seal. A puff of smoke covered his face, making Yukio cough again, before waving out the smoke in the room. A small handheld gourd was laying in the scroll's surface. Yukio peered curiously at the gourd, wondering what it had contained. Another small scroll sat next to the gourd. Yukio tentatively opened this scroll, only to find out kanji entitling a simple letter. Yukio read the letter. "Whoever has opened this vault, I congratulate you for being the gourd's next chosen user. This gourd is nigh indestructible, and can only be wielded by ones who this gourd finds acceptable. The gourd can contain anything, as it was passed down our lineage of ancestors. Treat the power of this gourd well, and I pray that whoever will wield this gourd good luck. The first royal Uzumaki cane. A Shinizu Uzumaki." Yukio gaped at the letter as he discovered what the gourd could do. Yukio looked at the gourd before deciding to seal it away for later uses. Yukio crawls out of the vault and watches as the vault slowly closes behind him. Today, Yukio had seen two of the greatest pieces of history in the universe that Izanagi governed. He had a lot of thoughts to sort out of his mind. The heavenly realm. Susanoo raised his blue Rinnegan eyes in amusement as he watched his chosen warrior get his first heavenly weapon. The gourd from which has been fashioned from the very testicles of the first demon that sprung forth from Yomi. Susanoo grinned as he remembered killing that demon. It had been a guilty pleasure of taking out demons, and that particular demon Susanoo took a liking to permanently disposing it. Susanoo grinned at that thought and fingered his sword, before deactivating his Rinnegan. A beautiful woman stepped up behind Susanoo as he gazed upon the waters that shone upon the human realm. She wore a flowing white kimono, adorned with a giant red ribbon. Tribal flame marks decorated the ribbon along with multitudes of beads that strung along with the ribbon. On her head was a crown that floated just above her forehead, giving an ethereal look to the sun goddess. She held a katana, sheathed by her hip. She had no eyebrows, signifying the royal status, and had flowing black hair that cascaded down her back. Her irises were pitch black in color and held a certain glint to them. As if everything she saw she could command it to burn. Amaterasu was somewhat relieved and worried why her brother had been inactive of messing with her. While it had been refreshing to see that he wasn't bothering her every 5 millennia, it was worrying that he wasn't himself for the past 6 years. After he had went and visited the neighboring realm, he had stuck to the well for 6 years, gazing upon a child and a red-haired woman. She spoke out to him. "Is she your human lover, brother?" Susanoo jumped up in surprise as Amaterasu scared him. "Geez, Ama-chan, don't do that." Amaterasu looked indifferently at the god. Susanoo sighed. "It's a soldier project that Izanagi and I had been working on." Amaterasu raised her eyebrow. Less eyebrow. For what exactly? Susanoo smiled deviously. For the second coming of the war. Amaterasu wore a shocked face as she listened to the words. She looked ready to rant at the god, but as soon as she opened her mouth, something caught her attention. She stared at the well, and peered into what Susanoo had been watched know this whole time. The rippled water showed a young boy making his way down deserted roads and desolate houses. But it wasn't the appearance that had caught the eye of Amaterasu. It was the boy's energy. A pang of hurt and anger ran through Amaterasu. That boy, is he an anomaly? She spat. Her eyes burned furiously, as black flames of the sun deity started entering reality. The room's temperature immediately increased significant amount that caused even Susanoo to sweat. Susanoo's grin threatened to split his face in half. Amaterasu glared at her brother. Why have you brought in an anomaly into this realm, Susanoo? You know I despise anomalies. Susanoo just shrugged. She frowned at Susanoo. I have pressing matters to attend to right now, but I expect a full explanation, brother. And I swear if you did this just to anger me, you will pay. Amaterasu's threat hung in the air. And with that Amaterasu pointed her finger out and dragged it across the air in front of her. The finger seemed to catch onto something, before tearing a hole into reality. She stepped into the Amanamanaka and disappeared from Susanoo's sight. Susanoo looked back into the well to keep track of his little project. Since he was an anomaly, they couldn't really see the outcome of his future. But he had a backup plan, just in case Izanagi's plan didn't go his way. Susanoo glanced back the boy figure currently walking back to the seal he had placed to tag down places. He smiled. Manhattan, New York. It was a quiet night in the city of Manhattan. At least what the New Yorkers would call quiet in the bustling city. Lights filled the air of the city. Warm winds swept through the city as some couples walked together as they toured the city at night. Some were parents taking their children out for a walk. The streets were filled with people walking, and many stores were closing up. All that were opened was the few convenience stores. Apartments were quiet as the people were fast asleep. Except for one household. Sally Jackson sat in the kitchen of her apartment, or what she would call an apartment. It was a rundown hovel, really. The ceiling was low as it could get, and Sally couldn't enter a doorway without having to duck down every time. Sally was filing her tax reports and other financial support files. She had tried out for many insurance plans, and had so many bank debts that she had to worry about. As she was filing this, an odd thought just ran by her head. She wondered how her deceased child was doing. After finding out that he had died, she fell into a small depression. What really pulled her out was raising her daughter. Sally then thought that she should visit the grave sometime, when Persephone was at school. And while Sally went back to filing the financial records of their little family, a young girl woke with a start. Long black hair covered the sheets, and her tan skin greatly contrasted with the sheets. Her sea-green eyes shone with confusion. She had that dream again. The dream of a boy that looked very similar to her. She contemplated on telling her mom, but she dismissed the idea. Then again, it's just a dream, right? Yukio ran over to the only house that was still standing. He saw lights in the room where his mother was staying. He took a deep breath and walked in. His mother was in what remained of the kitchens, and was currently stoking a fire that was heating a pot. It smelled really good. Kyoko motioned to him to come and sit by her. Yukio bounded over and plopped himself right next to Kyoko, cuddling himself right up to Kyoko. Kyoko chuckled as she wrapped her arm around the boy's frame. She hugged him tightly. I'm sorry about earlier, Yukio. I was caught in the moment. Yukio smiled. His Ka-chan was back. He hugged back tightly. It's okay, Ka-chan. You were sad, so I understand. Kyoko believed she cried a little. Large tears fell on the side of her face as she sobbed and hugged Yukio tightly. Oh, little boy, you grew up so much. Yukio's face turned bright red as he received attention from his mother. Ka-chan Tilda, he exclaimed. Kyoko laughed out loud. She ruffled his black hair and wiped away her tears. Come on, I've prepared dinner. Yukio smiled contently. As the night drew on, Yukio and Kyoko ate while Kyoko told stories of times when she grew up and the funny parts of her life. And then the butcher I met looked so shocked. I was laughing so hard. Then the funny thing was the money was there the whole time. Kyoko's voice was cut short with Yukio's laughter. Tears rolled down his face as her rolled around laughing. Kyoko smiled. So tell me what happened when you went out. Yukio immediately froze at her words as flashes of the giant snake and the 10-tailed demon flashed through his eyesight. The surrounding air suddenly felt cold, and the crickets living on the island suddenly felt silent. The air was so still, the fear was evident as it literally saturated the air. Unconsciously, Yukio began calling on the power of the sea, and the air felt colder as it was saturated with Yukio's chakra and water molecules that usually hung around the whole island. The molecules felt concentrated and dense. Kyoko gasped as she felt the waves of fear emanate from the young boy, and the obvious power he was excluding. Yukio frowned and shivered. He subconsciously pulled his legs closer to his body, a response to what humans call fight or flight. A reaction to high amounts of fear that commanded the body to protect itself. In Yukio's case, he chose the third path, the path that froze his body, hoping that the danger would overlook him. Kyoko immediately wrapped Yukio in a warm hug, comforting him while stroking his back. The wave of chakra subsided, but the damage was done. Kyoko had felt the malcontent of her child and was extremely concerned. It wasn't easy to put fear into her child, but something had obviously scared Yukio so much that he started leaking his dense chakra into the air. That and the obvious density of the chakra. Kyoko never felt chakra of that density ever before. The density almost made her feeling like she was swimming through honey, and when the chakra washed over the land, it had left a rather large indent on the ground. This made Kyoko realize Yukio's chakra was so much denser and large compared to the average Uzumaki Junin. Yukio never released that much chakra when they were training. Kyoko frowned. She began slowly stroking the back of her child, soothing him, and muttered encouraging words to the 6-year-old. Even though Yukio was in Kyoko's warm embrace, he was still shivering like he was locked in a freezer. The fear was ever so diminishing, but it wasn't going away. Kyoko let the silence take them, as she kept hugging Yukio and rocking him back and forth. When Yukio stopped shivering and seemed to calm down enough, Kyoko looked seriously at the boy. What happened? Yukio shivered again involuntarily. He remembered all the killer intent from the giant monster from the visions he saw from the vault. I saw something that scared me, Ka-chan, he murmured through his lips. Kyoko frowned. What did you see? Where did you go? Yukio looked up to his mother. I found a vault-like place and went in. There was a lot of awesome pictures, but I got sucked into the painting and I saw a horrible monster. If it was possible for Kyoko to look more worried, her expression right now was the pinnacle face of a worried parent. In which direction was this vault, Yukio-chan? As Yukio pointed in the direction of which he found the vault, Kyoko stiffened. Yukio, she said, you realize that there is nothing there, right? Right now Kyoko was terrified. The reason was that Yukio had pointed in the direction where nothing would have existed. There was no known Uzumaki building that was ever built in that direction, because the lands Yukio had pointed to, people had died once they went in. Yukio frowned. But I definitely saw something there. Look, I even got something from there. He unsealed the gourd which he had obtained from the vault. Kyoko held a confused look on her face. She slowly put her hand on his shoulders. Yukio, there is nothing there. Yukio looked even more confused now. What? He held up his hand. It's right here though. Kyoko touched his forehead with her hand to see if her son was all right. Yukio, I still see nothing. Yukio held a look of disbelief before sticking out the gourd. The letter said that it could hold an infinite amount of things, right? So how could he achieve that? Yukio pondered the thought before a small voice seemed to seek out to him in his head. Hold out the gourd and commanded to absorb what you want. Yukio nearly jumped in surprise. Where had the voice come from? Nevertheless, Yukio tried what the voice had told him. He stuck his hand out pointing the gourd towards the rubble that lined the streets. Yukio spoke with a strong tone. Gourd, absorb the rubble on this street. To his and Kyoko's surprise, the rubble began to shrink and spiral into the gourd's hole. The rocks seemed to stretch and fold into the space in Yukio's hand. This time, Kyoko clearly saw the gourd in his hand. Her eyes widened in surprise as the gourd appeared. Yukio noticed the eyes of his mother and smiled. See, Ka-chan, I wasn't lying. Kyoko looked at the gourd with an impressed look. She smiled. Yes, Yukio, I can see it now. Can I have a look at it now? Yukio handed out the gourd to Kyoko, only for the gourd to fall through Kyoko's hand like it didn't exist. The gourd clattered onto the ground before glowing and returning to Yukio's hand. Kyoko and Yukio stared at the gourd in his hand, staring at the old thing that had apparently fallen through Kyoko's hand like it didn't exist. Kyoko sighed. This was going to be a problem, Kyoko felt it. Yukio just sealed the gourd back into his wrist. The gourd went up in a puff of smoke. Soon Kyoko and Yukio sat in silence. The night sky was clear and was twinkling with millions of stars. The moon shone brightly, almost glowing, filling the night sky with illuminating light. Kyoko glanced at Yukio's face, the campfire casting a glow on his face. She spoke. You want to hear a bedtime story? Yukio nodded his head in agreement and proceeded to lay his head down on Kyoko's lap, curling up to the warm body. Kyoko leaned back and spoke with a soothing tone. Yukio, when you look up to the sky, what do you see right now? Yukio looked up. Stars. Kyoko smiled softly. Back in the much elder days, there was a weaver maiden. She would weave the countless stars you see in the sky right now. The next day, the clear blue sky shone upon two figures at an abandoned Uzumaki training ground. Kyoko held two bakken and some paper in her hands as she watched Yukio run through katas of the Uzumaki whirlpool style. Yukio's legs swung around, creating small gusts of turbulence that sent dust flying away. As Yukio was still 6 years old, his legs couldn't give much power to fully utilize the theorized taijutsu style. Kyoko stared long and hard to find any fault from the series of rapid stances that forced Yukio to utilize every muscle move of himself and the imaginary opponent. The faint gusts of wind whipped around the redhead, plastering her strands of hair all over the place. When she was content with the sufficient amount of katas done by Yukio, she called him off. Yukio panted as he grabbed his water pouch and spraying it all over his head. For some strange odd reason, Yukio always felt rejuvenated when he touched water. After his mother let him take a short break from the katas, she made Yukio sit down. Yukio questioningly looked at Kyoko, wondering what was going on. Kyoko gave Yukio a hard, stern look that almost made Yukio worry that he had disappointed his mother. He panicked. What had he done wrong? He was pretty sure that he had done his morning exercises correctly. He had followed every word that came out of Ka-chan's mouth. He had performed the katas correctly, right? While Yukio was panicking, Kyoko looked amused at the 6-year-old as he grew uncomfortable under the impassive stare that she was giving to Yukio. Kyoko cracked a grin. Yukio looked relieved and confused at the same time when Kyoko finally smiled. Kyoko spoke first. I'm so proud of you. Finishing the theoretical taijutsu at the cute age of 6? Unheard of in the Uzumaki lineage. Yukio blushed. He rubbed the back of his head in a sheepish manner. Kyoko suddenly grabbed his cheeks and stretched them out. So cute. Yukio tried to pry his mother's hands away from his cheeks with no avail. Ka-chan, Tilda, are you trying to take my face apart? Kyoko stopped stretching his face and patted him on the head like he was a cute little puppy that had garnered the attention of the Yukio started pouting. Kyoko squealed in delight at the cute face that Yukio was pulling. After few minutes of teasing her son about his newest achievements, she went back to business. Kyoko held up the slips of paper. Yukio, do you know what these are? Yukio nodded. Those are chakra papers for the purpose of good chakra absorbing fuinjutsu paper. I know that, Ka-chan, but what does that have to do with anything? Kyoko chuckled. She further explained what she was doing. Yukio, do you know what elemental affinities are? Yukio looked questioningly at Kyoko. His eyes glimmered with curiosity. Kyoko kept explaining. Elemental affinities are what all people with chakra are in tune with, a certain type of nature aspect. Can you tell me all the nature aspects? Yukio scrunched his forehead together, trying to answer the question. I think there was fire, water, earth, wind, and lighting. Kyoko clapped her hands together. Excellent. These are types of nature transformations your chakra can be in tune with. Every person at least has one type of nature transformation. Remember, with some storage seals you could seal nature aspects, right? Yukio's head bobbed up and down. Now with shinobis and people who train in the art of ninjutsu, they can use their elemental affinities to mold their jutsu, creating ninjutsu based off of elements. Kyoko then proceeded to create hand seals. Sweden. Mizu soju. Water started coming from the nearby pond and swirling in Kyoko's hand. Yukio looked at the hypnotically spinning ball of water his mother's hand. The water glowed blue as it was saturated with Kyoko's chakra. Kyoko shut off the jutsu and spoke again. Right now, you will probably only have one strong elemental affinity. Yukio spoke up. So how do we find out my elemental affinity, Ka-chan? Kyoko held up the chakra papers. With these, then she proceeded to push her chakra in one of the papers. Then right before Yukio's eyes the paper split apart before turning into soggy paper. You see, Yukio, when you push your chakra through the paper picks up your elemental affinity and shows you with results like this. If you have a sweetened affinity, your paper will get soggy like mine. If you have futon affinity it will cut apart like mine. If you have other elements, Kaden chakra will burn the paper, Raiden will crinkle up the paper, and the Doden chakra will crumble your paper to dust. Kyoko then handed Yukio a chakra paper. Try pushing your chakra into the paper. Yukio tentatively grasped the paper and channeled his chakra into the paper. What happened next kind of scared Kyoko. Once Yukio channeled his chakra through the paper instantly disintegrated into pure water. The paper now turned water then exploded in a whirlwind of power. The now soaked Kyoko and Yukio stared in shock at the piece of paper that defined Yukio's elemental affinity. Yukio looked up. Was it supposed to do that? Kyoko just twitched her eye. She sighed. It was going to be really tiresome teaching her son. Well, now that we know your elemental affinity, Yukio, let's dry off first and get to your training your elemental affinity. Yukio grinned. He was one step closer to being able to protect his mother. Kyoko grabbed a leaf that was on the ground. Now, since your elemental affinity is sweetened, let's work on that. I want you to get this leaf soaked just like what happened to us, okay? Yukio nodded and grabbed the leaf. He scrunched his face. Kyoko watched him as he tried to get the leaf soaked in water. After a few seconds, Yukio held up his hand. Ka-chan, I did it. The leaf was dripping wet and seemed to be oversaturated with water. Kyoko stared at the leaf and Yukio. Should be possible? Kyoko steeled herself and asked Yukio to do it again. Yukio came back few seconds later with a dripping wet leaf. Kyoko stared at the young boy. Already getting the basics down of elemental training in a minute. He really is a genius. Kyoko stammered. Well, I guess you can go to the next step of Uzumaki Suiten training. Yukio tilted his head in a questioningly manner. Kyoko smiled deviously. Kyoko just stared at the Yukio while he concentrated at the sea. His hands down in the water controlling the water in front of him. In front of the two was a single whirlpool created from Yukio himself. The more Kyoko looked at it, the more she had to tell herself that what she was looking at was real. The exercise had been creating a whirlpool from the elemental chakra, and Yukio, a 6-year-old had done what even prodigies of Uzumaki's couldn't. Create a full-scale storm in a single try. The whirlpool slowly got faster and faster, white frothing water circling the spiral which got deeper and deeper. Kyoko could feel the large amounts of chakra being used, but controlled at a superfine level. Kyoko saw his control over sweetened chakra. It was incredible. Kyoko put her hand on Yukio's shoulder. Yukio, how about something else? Do you think you can make more? Yukio looked back at Kyoko and then concentrated even more. The whirlpool started splitting apart into two. Kyoko frowned. Yukio, try making as many whirlpools as you can. Yukio nodded and started straining. Sweat droplets started appearing as he divided the whirlpools even further. 10 whirlpools now faced Yukio as he willed the water to swirl faster. Yukio could feel the sweetened chakra molding and swirling as fast as he wanted, and he could see the 10 whirlpools in front of him frothing with the white power of the sea. The frothing white water splashed recklessly against the shores of the island, creating trenches in the beaches themselves. But Yukio was feeling the strain of controlling such constructs. The water in front of him was too powerful to manipulate like this, and it caused Yukio to have a massive headache. The tugging in his gut wasn't helping either. Kyoko, seeing the pain in his face, tapped the shoulder of Yukio once more before motioning him to stop. When Yukio let go of the control of the whirlpools, he fell down unconscious when Kyoko caught him and set him down. She smiled. You did well. Then she carried him on her back all the way to their little encampment in her former home. When Kyoko walked back into the island's mainland, A shinobi dressed in black with a blank white mask darted through the forest and ran all the way to an encampment outside the island. Root had something to tell Danzo. Unknown to both Kyoko and Yukio, multiple villages had their eyes on them. Another Anbu operative ran out of the shadow as well to inform the Raikage what she had seen. Ever since their mistake with the Hyuga in Konoha, the third Raikage had stepped down and the fourth Raikage had taken reign. Ni Yugito sprinted back towards Kumogakure to inform what she had seen. A sweet and affinity that great. At the age of 6. This could definitely benefit Kumo if they got the little child to join their village. A third Anbu eyed the rapidly fading two Anbu operatives. He quickly fled towards Kirigakure to inform the Yondaime Mizukage of a possible war deterrent they had found. Yagura would be most pleased that they had found a child with such magnificent power and wasn't from any bloodline. Well, any bloodline that couldn't be used as those demons back in Kiri. The Anbu quickly vanished with a shunshin and disappeared. Konoha. An Anbu dropped in front of Danzo as he sat in his throne. Danzo-sama. Danzo looked at the Anbu with a critical eye. Why have you requested an audience with me, nay? The Anbu faced impassively at Danzo, showing no fear whatsoever at the old cripple. We have knew of the Uzumaki child. Today they have tried to find his elemental affinity. It was Sweden, but that wasn't the most surprising part, Danzo-sama. Danzo raised an eyebrow. Oh, do tell. The Anbu went on. The child has shown incredible control over Sweden chakra and was able to complete the tree leaf Sweden exercise in record time, Danzo-sama. Danzo frowned. How fast was this exactly? The Anbu went silent for a moment before saying, 5 seconds, Danzo-sama. Danzo widened his eyes at that revelation. To be able to control Sweden chakra to that degree was an amazing feat, especially for one so young. He muttered. He might be even better than Tobirama-sensei's control over the element. The Anbu cleared his throat to get the attention of Danzo. There is something else, Danzo-sama. Danzo snapped his head up, eagerly wanting to hear what the Anbu agent had to say. The Anbu seemed uncomfortable with this information. The Uzumaki child seems to be able to create 10 whole whirlpools as an exercise for his Sweden chakra. He seems to be only able to create and control 10 whirlpools before succumbing to the information overload and chakra exhaustion. Danzo froze at this revelation. A child, only at the age of 6, already to be working on such elemental exercises? With the level of control the child had, he could as well become a threat or an invaluable ally. Screw the Uchiha right now. To be able to control a force of nature in a similar way his sensei had, it was mind-addling. Danzo stayed silent for a while. Then he spoke. Report to me when something interesting happens again. Keep on monitoring the child. His control over Sweden is most concerning. He dismissed the Anbu. As he sat in his throne he spoke aloud. Hear that, Orochimaru? A child with the capabilities only Tobirama-sensei had when he was an adult. What do you think? A man stepped out of the shadow. His face was pale white with purple marking all over his body. A long snake-like tongue hung out of the man's mouth. His slitted eyes scanned Danzo with a twisted grin. Oh, he sounds the most interesting, Danzo. A fine specimen. Kukakuku. Kumo. Raikage-sama. Jonin Yugito has come to talk to you. The secretary at the Raikage's tower opened the door at the office. Paper stacked all over the room as the Raikage sat in the middle of the room. The Raikage hat sat upon his head as he signed away papers. A looked up from a crazed glare that scared the secretary. Our Raikage-sama? Please, anything to get me away from this horrid paperwork. I had a frantic look on his face when the secretary came in. Finally someone can take me away from the horrid paperwork. When Yugito went in, it recomposed himself, and went into what his brother called, Raikage mode. Yugito. Raikage-sama. Assigned. What's the report in the Uzumaki child right now? Yugito grinned at the prospect of telling her what she saw. The kid's really good. He trained with his elemental affinity today. Raised his eyebrow. The Uzumaki child who is only 6 has started on his elemental affinity. Yugito nodded. And during the test, I saw something that I thought was impossible until I saw this kid. She stopped for suspense. He turned the chakra paper completely to water. It just liquefied. The paper was so soaked that it liquefied. Stared at Yugito. An elemental affinity so potent that it turned something into another element completely? Yugito smiled. Yep, Then she went on. But that's not it. The kid's mom wanted him to move on the other chakra exercise for the kid. This time he was able to create a giant whirlpool at his first try. He didn't even seem winded. Listened on. And when she wanted him to create more whirlpools, guess how many he made? Just deadpanned. Yugito seemed sheepish at what she was doing and calmed down. Just a bit. He was able to create 10 whirlpools and control them for a minute. It was amazing, seeing it in action. A 6-year controlling 10 whirlpools. I mean, he fainted from chakra exhaustion later, but that's understandable. To supply 10 whirlpools is crazy. Became quiet. He seems like this Uzumaki child is a prodigy. Yugito grinned. If he joins our village, we could be really strong. Nodded at this fact. Yes, they could easily be the strongest village of the nations. Grinned. Yes. Kiri. Yagura-sama, I have returned with the information of the Uzumaki boy. The Anbu spoke to Yagura. Yagura turned his pink eyes on the shinobi. Speak. The Anbu operative bowed again before speaking. The Uzumaki boy seems to be extremely talented, and has monstrous reserves for someone so young. He was able to supply and control enough chakra for 10 whirlpool formations and held them for 5 minutes. His affinity seems to be an extreme sweeten affinity, as when he checked for his elemental affinity, the chakra paper liquefied. Yagura sat in his desk and took in the new information. Remind me again, how old is the child? The Anbu spoke once more. He is 6 years old, and nearing 7 this October, Yagura-sama. Yagura then dismissed the Anbu to go back and spy on the child. Then out of the shadows, a man with a spiraling mask appeared out of nowhere. He spoke. Yagura Dono, why did you call me? Yagura's eyes briefly shone red before answering. We seem to find an interesting child. He has an incredibly high sweeten affinity on par with the Nidaime Hokage. The man briefly stopped. That is interesting. I will be looking into this child. What is his name? Yagura spoke again. Uzumaki Yukio. A clash of metal against metal rung throughout the training ground as two people were viscously clashing blades against one another. Kyoko Uzumaki was currently sparring with her son Yukio Uzumaki in a not-so-deadly spar of swords. They both held long rods of metal, shaped to be swords but none of the cutting power behind a real sword. They both swung the metal rods at each other, trying to get past each other's guards for the past 30 minutes. Yukio cleaved his blade upwards. Kenjutsu. Basic split. The metal rod cleaved upwards, giving Kyoko nearly no time to retaliate. She could only watch as the metal rod incoming towards her face as she hastily tried to block it with her own bastardized sword. Yukio's blade shot up with so much strength that it displaced the air molecules, creating a vacuum that acted as a metaphorical blade. The vacuum cleaved everything not durable in half with the power of a vacuum, leaving a large gash in the ground and air. When his blade met with his mother's, the blade cracked with the force from the blade, forcing Kyoko to drop her blade. She called off the spar. Yukio gasped and grinned. He had finally beaten his mother in a kenjutsu spar. Kyoko called him over to sit next to her for a short break. It was an eventful past year. After learning what Yukio's elemental affinity was, Kyoko went to extreme lengths to teach him how to have near-perfect control over the element. Yukio had been exceptionally good with control over sweeten jutsus. His control over water was somewhat impeccable, surprising even Kyoko at the level of control that Yukio possessed over the element. Yukio now easily had reserves for mid-chunin, and his chakra density was amazing. The sheer density of his chakra created craters in the ground where Kyoko had Yukio draw out his chakra. The young boy advanced incredibly during the 1 year Kyoko had trained him. The island was closed off only to them after she had discovered the intruders that had lurked around Uzu. The seals that she had put up had prevented other parties from entering the grounds of Uzu, but that also meant that Kyoko and Yukio had to stay inside the island at all costs. Yukio had upped his kenjutsu training, taking in the art of the blade like a fish to water. The raven-haired boy mastered techniques that Kyoko considered moderate in weeks of non-stop training. As Yukio sat next to Kyoko for a little rest, she smiled a tired little face. Yukio, she spoke. Do you think about what you want to do in your life? Do you have a goal in life which you want to achieve? Yukio looked at his mother with a confused glance. What are you talking about, Ka-chan? Kyoko smiled sadly. Yukio, someday I'm not going to be in the world of the living. I'm going to have to leave you whether I like it or not. I just want you to know what you want to do after I'm gone." Quote. Yukio looked mortified. "Ka-chan, don't leave me." Kyoko laughed. "Come on Sochi. Forget about what I said. Now are you done resting?" Yukio tilted his head to the side. "Yeah, why?" Kyoko grinned. "Taijutsu training tilde." Yukio paled as he ducked under the wide kick Kyoko swiped over his head. He quickly retaliated kick aimed his mother's head as she was finished with her kick. As soon as he launched his kick, Kyoko dodged. Yukio and Kyoko both jumped back and faced each other. Yukio narrowed his eyes as Kyoko smiled with mirth at the young child. Slow breeze blew through the field that they were sparring on. As if someone shot an invisible pistol, Yukio shot off trying to hit his mother. Kyoko quickly brought up her arms in a guard. Yukio noted of this and quickly shifted his footing while appearing in front of her. Hakai Sudansu, Yukio started. Kyoko shifted her legs in case of a powerful attack that was going her way, unconsciously sending chakra to her legs and arms for impact. Kaijo Rashomon. Yukio hooked his legs behind Kyoko's guard, forcing it down with the centripetal force of spinning kick. Kyoko grinned. She had known that he was going for that move, but no matter what she did, she couldn't strengthen her arms enough from the combined force of chakra and force. A knee came up following the leg pushing down her guard, which was about to hit Kyoko in the face. Before the knee could hit her, she bent her body back, making Yukio's knee hit nothing. Kyoko then rushed through Yukio's undefeated guard and slammed her head onto his head. Yukio reeled back in pain before bringing his arm up in defense against another vicious punch that was aimed at his face. He spun around and kicked as hard as he could. Kyoko slid back from the force of the kick that was presented at her. Yukio grinned. He shot forward again, forcing his knee into the guard of Kyoko. Hakai Sudansu Hakuto. Kyoko gritted her teeth against the immense force Yukio put behind the blow. He immediately backed off before forming a stance, Kyoko to well recognized. CGN Yoran. Hei Wei de Quanto. Yukio shot his fist forward in a basic fighting stance that generated force capable of causing winds arise. The same force that ripped his sleeves and connected with Kyoko's guard. Yukio started again with his second stance. CGN Yoran. Jiandao. Yukio kicked sideways into Kyoko's guard. Kyoko grimaced at the small pain that erupted at her abdomen. Using chakra is starting to strain my disease. I have to end this quickly. Kyoko thought. She quickly formed her own stance. Hakai Sudansu. Bainok. Kyoko kicked her legs directly perpendicular to the ground and broke Yukio's guard, knocking him out. As Yukio fell to the ground, Kyoko caught him and smiled. He improved so much, she muttered. Suddenly a series of horrid coughs erupted from Kyoko's mouth. She covered her mouth with her hand, and when she pulled it away, blood could be seen in her hand. Kyoko's eyes hardened. She knew she didn't have long before she died. She had to get Yukio strong for himself so he could survive in the god-forsaken world. She quickly packed up the training equipment before sealing it away and giving the sleeping form of Yukio a piggyback ride. As she walked, she thought about all the fun times she had since raising Yukio. Before, it was a dreary life for Kyoko. Coming from a prestigious house of taijutsu, Kyoko always knew how to defend herself. After the Uzu got attacked, she became a wandering nomad, looking for her little brother. Flashback. Shivering in the cold, Kyoko could be seen wearing rags and huddled in an alley. Her usually vibrant red hair was so dirtied, one would have thought her hair was brown. Kyoko's usually vibrant violet eyes were dull and clear. Malnutrition could be seen facing the girl. Suddenly Kyoko stood up and sneaked a glance at a store that held vibrant apples in a basket. She slowly sneaked up to the basket before snatching it away running. The store manager caught sight of her running away with the basket of apples, and screamed profanities at the child for stealing. Kyoko smiled. She would be having a nice dinner tonight. As she slowed down, she brought out an apple and started eating. When she finished, she had bumped into a man. He looked down upon her. He had a long black cloak that covered most of the old man's body. His white hair obviously showed his age as wrinkled skin came even wrinklier. But the most imposing thing about the man was his cold hard glare that seemed to be able to freeze anything it saw. They were pinwheels. Kyoko stared up at the eyes of the man. The red glow in his eye almost seemed to hypnotize and pull in Kyoko. Kyoko stared up in horror. The man spoke. "Who are you, child?" Those 4 words seemed to snap Kyoko out of her trance. She spoke tentatively. "Kyoko." The man seemed to contemplate this. "Don't you have family to go to, child?" Kyoko teared up, but tried to hold them back. Flashes of memories poured into her vision. Her mother screaming at her to run away before being gutted by Iwa, teacher looking at her with a kind glance before rushing to the battlefield preparing combat seals in the air. She could see her father, one of the strongest men she ever knew, take on the army of shinobi with his bare hands only to fall to multitudes of lacerations inflicted on him by several kumo nin. Kyoko was brought back to the real world, when the old man grunted in an irritated way that signaled her that she was currently wasting the old man's time. She stuttered, My family is dead, except for my brother." The old man frowned. "What is your clan name, child?" Kyoko looked down. "Yu Uzumaki." The old man seemed taken back, and this time seemed to scrutinize Kyoko under a careful eye. His eyes lingered on her hair, which was currently so dirty, that it took a moment for the old man to see the red hair. The old man spoke again. "This brother of yours, do you know where he is? We got separated at the invasion in Uzu. The evacuation teams separated us before he went away." Kyoko replied. The old man held a calculating glimmer in his eye. He turned his back from Kyoko and walked away. "Make sure to look where you are going, child." Kyoko shivered. The aura the man was excluding just screamed danger. Kyoko trudged on into the night. Kyoko frowned. As she trudged through the marshy island, she relived some of her old memories. The terrain of the land slowly changed from a marshy swamp to a smoother ground terrain. The vegetation of the land grew fuller with more plant life filling up the land of Uzu. Yukio mumbled in his sleep as he clung onto Kyoko's robes. When she reached the little shack they had created once Kyoko decided to settle in Uzu for a while, she set Yukio on a makeshift bed. Before reaching for a small bottle, producing to 2 small pills, she popped them in her mouth. Then she sat down and sighed. She pulled out a scroll, placing it in some of Yukio's bags. Inserting her chakra into the seal, she pulled out a piece of paper and started writing. The paintbrush quickly filling in the empty spaces that was the scroll. The ink fluently flowing from the scroll, she had finished whatever she was going to be writing on the scroll. But she hoped that it didn't have to come to this. By the sunlight, 2 shinobi could be seen hiding in the natural foliage of the border of the famed Uzu Shiogakure. "Do you have the deactivation matrix?" A dull question was whispered through the mask of a ninja wearing a blank name mask. A single nod confirmed the ninja's position at Uzu. His hands formed a seal and a flash of chakra reverberated through the air. The seals all across Uzu fell for a brief moment, before patching up again, as if it never happened. The 2 ninja were gone. Kumo ninja frowned at this. Yugito quickly motioned the 2 shinobi behind her with quick Anbu hand signals. They too vanished into the open gates of Uzu. As Kyoko finished up her scroll, she placed it into the small bag labeled Yukio. She sat by the resting form of Yukio, who currently had a little drool going down by his cheek. His black hair tousled and long without a haircut for nearly 2 years. One could almost mistake him for a female, if not the fact that his hair stuck up and gave him a small feral look. Kyoko smiled softly as she stared at the peaceful-looking form of Yukio. A small snore made Kyoko giggle a little bit, before giving his forehead a light peck before moving to the campfire to get dinner ready. Then she had felt it. A small burst of chakra that had disrupted the Uzu containment and defense seals. The shields were down. She frowned. Red seals glowed on her skin lighting up the slowly growing dark sky. As it notified Kyoko of intruders in Uzu. The 2 ninja met up at the front gate of Uzu, before finding the seal that controlled the island defense systems. A quick Raiden jutsu disabled the seals and eventually opened up the fields. Instantly a battalion of ninja appeared at the gates of Uzu. 10 more ninja all ready for combat had rushed into the lands of Uzu to get their priority target. As Anbu hand signals went up they all shot off into the darkness. A few seconds later, a few Kumo shinobi appeared. They also vanished into the night. Kyoko hurried back to the little cottage. Yukio was still sleeping in his little cot snoring away. She gently picked him up and took the scroll that had held their items. She stepped out of the cottage before lighting up the cottage with a quick Kaiden jutsu and left. Dashing through the woods, with the swift rhythm of his mother's running, Yukio slowly came to. He groggily wiped his eyes as he blinked out the crusts and as he gained his senses, he noticed that his mother was carrying him while dashing through the woods of Uzu. Yukio frowned. Something felt wrong. The atmosphere seemed like it was charged with a certain energy. Kyoko felt Yukio wake up and slowly settled down in a stealthy way to not draw much attention, not that it would help in any way. Kyoko had a feeling whichever village sent the ninja after her and her son, they were going to be very good. She leapt onto the highest branch on a tree and set Yukio down. Yukio automatically clung to the tree using the tree walking exercise before looking at confusion at his mother. "Ka-chan?" he questioned, tilting his head as he looked at Kyoko with worry. Kyoko panted slightly as she ruffled Yukio's head. "Go, and hide. I will come back for you, but if they find you, they will try to take you away, so I will draw them away from you. Try to meet up at the shoreline of the island at the site where we entered the village." Yukio looked anguished. "But Ka-san." Kyoko knelt down to look at Yukio's eyes. His sea-green eyes swirled with unknown energy and power that enamored Kyoko the first time she ever saw him. "Hey, Yukio," she said with a sad smile. "Ka-san will come back, I promise." Yukio looked up with hope. "Promise?" Kyoko grinned. She stuck out her pinky and said, "Promise." Yukio hesitantly took his mother's hand and hooked pinkies with his mother, before dashing off to find a suitable hiding spot. Kyoko's smile dropped as she pulled out an extremely tattered Hite-ite. A swirling symbol glimmered against the near-rusted metal of the Hite-ite of a long-forgotten village. Flashback. "Nay, Arashi-sensei," a young Kyoko asked a man laying down in his hammock. "What should shinobi do?" With an eyebrow raised, Arashi looked questioningly at his young apprentice. "Why do you want to know?" He spoke with a soft voice. Kyoko held up a brightly gleaming Hite-ite. She adjusted its movements, shing the newly polished metal of the forehead protector, signifying the great village of Uzu. "I want to know what I should be protecting as a shinobi. What I should be following," she muttered. Arashi smiled. "It's a good thought to have that." Then he muttered, "Granted, no one as young as you should be thinking of that yet." He went on, "When you put that Hite-ite on your head, it represents that you will be a proud Uzu shinobi." "But," he continued as he saw the questioning stare from his student, "as a shinobi, you should protect the foremost thing that you think is important. Do you know what we Uzumaki treasure the most?" Kyoko shook her head no. Arashi ruffled Kyoko's hair, making her bright red hair stand up. "It's family. We Uzumaki treasure family above the others. We never leave someone we think is our family behind. Never. Now I'm not telling you how you should think, but I hope I answered your question." Kyoko smiled. "Yeah, I think that's what I will protect." End. Kyoko looked sorrowfully at the worn-down shinobi Hite-ite. She hadn't worn the Hite-ite since the fall of Uzu, since she had abandoned her family. Her eyes grew with a strong glint. She tied her Hite-ite around her neck, signifying that she was a kunoichi of Uzu Shiogakure. She whispered quietly, "Hey, Arashi-sensei, guess what? I'm going to protect my family till my dying breath." Her eyes widened as a silhouette of a man smiling down at her appeared. An invisible hand seemed to pat her on her shoulder. A single tear fell down Kyoko's cheek as she stared at the place where she had hallucinated the apparition of her sensei. Quickly wiping away her tear, she flickers out of sight with a shunshin. The sun set over the hill, casting its final glow of red, turning the night into the darkness. Kyoko didn't slow down as she leapt out of the forest and onto the shorelines of Uzu. She had one goal in mind: getting the shinobi that had infiltrated the island away from her son. A kunai flew from the darkness of the forest and nicked the side of Kyoko's face. Kyoko jumped out of the way as 11 shinobi appeared out of the forest, all wearing blank white masks that showed no emotion to Kyoko. One shinobi stepped forward holding a kunai towards Kyoko. "Kyoko Uzumaki, Danzo-sama wants you in Konoha." The shinobi's sharp tone cut through the air. The shinobi both tried to stare down at each other. Kyoko threw a hateful glare at the shinobi. "Never," she hissed out. The shinobi tensed. "Then where is the other Uzumaki?" "Your child." Kyoko glared even harder and excluded heavy killing intent. "You will never touch my child." She threw a kunai at the leader, which he quickly blocked. 3 of the shinobi jumped forward as they ran through several seals before shouting, "Kaden! Habashiri!" Jets of fire spewed out of their mouths which nearly hit Kyoko. The battlefield was now illuminated with the red and orange flames of the fires. The air was slowly becoming drier. Kyoko looked around. Shit! Kyoko stifled through some seals before calling out, "Sweden! Sukasari no jutsu!" Chains of water erupted from the beach, some piercing the shinobi who were caught in the crossfires. The remaining shinobi ran forward unsheathing their tantos, trying to stab into Kyoko. A clash of steel met with a kunai and sparks rained down upon the earth. A fierce glare was met with a blank mask. Each slash was met with another kunai. Nicks of slash marks would appear on Kyoko as she tried to defend and attack at the same time. Quickly making hand signs, she called out, "Sweden, Senko Suru," and spit out high-pressure water streams. Distracted by the water streams, the other shinobi did not realize until the end as Kyoko slashed their necks in a clean cut while saying, "Uzumaki Kenjutsu, air slash." The remaining shinobi, now battered and bruised, breathed hard as he faced Uzumaki Kyoko alone. Kyoko turned to face the final standing shinobi. Manipulating W or water chains once more, she pinned down the shinobi before pressing her blade on the shinobi's neck. She growled out, "Why are you here? Why are you tracking my son?" The shinobi coughed out before saying, "You shall learn nothing from me." Kyoko dug her blade further into his neck. "Tell me what you are planning." The shinobi gasped air as the blade was pressing down on his windpipe. "We will have already gotten your child now." Quote. Kyoko whipped around as she felt a burst of chakra coming from the far side of the beach. "Yukio!" Yukio dashed through the beach as he felt the chakra bursts from the other side of the beach. He hid in the tall dunes of the beach as he worried that his Ka-san might not come back. "No, she promised to come back. She will be back, right?" In his distress, he did not notice the shinobi who was currently searching through the beach for any sign of the young Uzumaki. The shinobi caught glance of the small child trying to blend in with the dunes to hide himself. If not the shinobi be a censor, he would have overlooked Yukio hiding in the dunes. The shinobi silently creeped up behind Yukio, silently noting that the fighting noise had gone down. He had little time to complete his mission. He was about to strike senbon into a pressure point of the child, when the Yukio whirled around and kicked the senbon out of the shinobi's hand. The shinobi backed up before drawing his blade, and blocked an incoming kunai to his face. Yukio kicks up while spinning, almost nailing the Anbu agent in the gut, if the shinobi didn't back up quickly. Anbu agent keeps on dodging while Yukio kept trying to hit the shinobi. The harder Yukio seemed to try, the easier the shinobi dodged him. Soon, Yukio became enraged and fired off one jutsu his mother taught him. Yukio kicked forward, flicking water which turned into thousands of needles while shouting, "Sweden, Suihou." Thousands of water needles came down on the Anbu shinobi as needles upon needles pierced the body of the shinobi. Yukio looked triumphant as he stared at the slowly bleeding shinobi until he realized on what he had done. He had killed someone. He stared at shock at the slowly bleeding body of the, not noticing the very same shinobi creeping up behind him about to grab his neck. A sharp cry of, "Yukio!" snapped Yukio out of his trance and made him turn around just to see the shinobi creeping up behind him get stabbed through the stomach with a broken tanto. As the shinobi fell to his knees, Kyoko appeared standing behind the shinobi, letting go of the tanto she had shoved into the shinobi. The shinobi collapsed to the ground as he stared at the broken piece of blade sticking out from his torso. Yukio let go of a breath that he had been holding during the whole ordeal. Kyoko quickly rushed in and grabbed him. Clutching her son's body tightly, small tears stemming from her eyes, she slowly rubbed the back of Yukio as small arms hung onto his mother. His trembling body calmed down as Kyoko kept on soothing him down. "Shush," Kyoko whispered. "It's going to be okay." While the two were hugging, the shinobi slowly choked up on his blood. The red life liquid slowly poured out of his mouth and under his mask as pools of blood appeared under the collapsing body of the shinobi. With his dying breath, he activated a suicide technique. Kyoko's eyes widened as she realized what the Anbu shinobi was going to do. Seals appeared all over the body before exploding into pieces. Shards of metal flew out everywhere as the propelling force of the explosions pushed them through the air. Kyoko quickly covered up Yukio in a protective cocoon with her body. In an instant, the explosion was over. Yukio peeked open his eyes. He sighed. "It's over, isn't it, Ka-chan?" No response came. Yukio looked up. A large shrapnel piece was embedded through Kyoko's stomach just centimeters away from hitting Yukio. A blood droplet spilled onto Yukio's forehead. That's all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.